Well, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, The 5 Love Languages, here at Ozark Christian College. My name's Dr. Gary Zustiak, and I just want to welcome you for spending this time with us looking at the 5 love languages. You know, Valentine's Day is coming up next week, so all of our thoughts turn towards love. And I think we all want to be loving people who communicate love to our spouses, to our children and grandchildren. But the problem is that people speak different love languages. Many times our good intentions at communicating love may not be enough. Let me give you an example of some of my major fails. We had first got married. My dad always taught me, to take care of my vehicles and keep them clean and good working condition. So I took my wife's car out Saturday morning and I washed it and I waxed it and I armor-alled the inside and I vacuumed it out. And all this time I'm thinking, wow, she's going to know how much I love her. And while I'm doing that, she's inside looking out the window at me, and she's thinking, he loves that blankety blank car more than he does me. Major fail. Another time, she was out visiting relatives because there were some health issues that were involved. And so while she's gone, I thought, man, I'm going to show her how much I love her. And I'm going to just clean the house from top to bottom. And so, man, I vacuumed and I polished the furniture and I dusted and I had all the clothes washed and all the dishes done. And I'm like, she's going to know how much I love her. And when she gets home, she sees everything. And her response is, so you think I'm a lousy housekeeper, huh? Major fail. That's why you need to learn your mate's love language so that your love, your concern can actually connect with them. So we need to learn how to communicate our love in a way that connects with our spouse and the children in a most effective way. So this webinar is it's a short overview of the insights of Gary Chapman. It's taken from his book, The 5 Love Languages. I don't see my little...
Yep, you're good.
Okay, and here is his book, The 5 Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts. And so this is where I've taken all of our information. I'm just going to share that with you, give him credit for it all. His book was so well received, he also wrote a follow-up book, The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers. And so I would really encourage you also to look into that. So let's go ahead and look at the 5 love languages. So not only do we need to say, I love you to our mates and to our children, we need to say it in a way that it's going to be heard. Dr. Chapman has written a wonderful best-selling book, the one that I just told you about, The 5 Love Languages. So he's discovered that it's not enough to love your mate. You must learn to express your love in the love language that's the most preferred and understood by your mate. The very first love language is words of affirmation. Mark Twain once said, I can live for 2 months on a good compliment. From that statement, I'm pretty sure words of affirmation were Twain's preferred love language. Now, you see, actions don't always speak louder than words. Because if words of affirmation are your love language, then unsolicited compliments, they mean the world to you. I mean, hearing the words, I love you, that's important. but hearing the reasons behind that love brings even greater joy. King Solomon has written these words, and he says, "The tongue has the power of life and death. An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up." Words of affection and endearment, words of praise and encouragement, they're like a gentle, warm rain falling on the soul. They nurture a person's sense of worth and security. And even though the words can be quickly said, they are not soon forgotten. Praise and affection are often combined in the message that we give to a child, and we need to be able to distinguish the two. Affection and love mean expressing appreciation for the very being of a child. For those characteristics and abilities, that's part of the total package of the person. In contrast, we express praise for what the child does, either in achievements or behavior or conscious attitudes. Praise needs to be for something over which the child has a degree of control. And the reason it's important to make this distinction is simply because if we express love and appreciation when a child performs or achieves something, he'll grow up believing that love is conditional, that being loved depends upon performance. But that's not what we want. We want our children to know that they are loved unconditionally, simply for who they are. But we praise them when they accomplish some significant feat because it shows initiative and effort. It communicates that we're aware and involved in their lives. Years ago, there was a middle school teacher in Minnesota who did just a remarkable thing. She asked her students to list the names of all the other students in class and then leaving a space between the names. And then she told them to think of the nicest thing that they could say about each of their classmates and to write it down on that piece of paper. So at the end of the period, she collected all these sheets, and over the weekend, she wrote the name of each student on a separate sheet, and then she listed everything that the other students had written about that person that they had appreciated about them. And then on Monday, she gave each student his or her list. And as they began reading, they started whispering to each other, "Wow, I never knew that meant anything to anyone." Or, "I didn't know other people liked me so much." I mean, the papers were never discussed in class, but the teacher knew that this exercise, it really was a success because it gave her students such a positive feeling about themselves. Several years later, sadly, one of those students graduated high school, joined the military, was deployed to Vietnam, and lost his life there. After his body was returned to Minnesota, most of his classmates, along with the teacher, attended the funeral. At the luncheon after the service, the father of the young man sought out this teacher, and he says, "I want to show you something." He took a wallet out of his pocket. "They found this on Mark when he was killed. We thought you would recognize it." And opening the billfold, he removed 2 worn sheets of notebook paper that had been taped, folded, and refolded many times. It was the list of the good things that Mark's classmates had written about him. "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother told the teacher. "As you can see, our son treasured it. He took that out and he would read that list over and over again. And one by one, Mark's classmates began to reveal that each one of them still had that sheet, and they read it often. Some of them carried it in their billfold. One even put it in his wedding album. One man said, "I think we all saved that list." Words of affirmation are powerful, especially if it's a person's primary love language. So what I would encourage you to do at this time is make it a goal to give your spouse a different compliment each day for 1 month. That's what I want you to do. Just think of something really great that you could compliment them, just one a day for a month. And then look for your spouse's strengths and tell them how much you appreciate those strengths. And be specific. Thank your mate for something that maybe they do routinely and they wouldn't expect to be complimented for. So think about right now what you could do to compliment your mate for something they do or some wonderful characteristic about them. But the other important thing is you need to be genuine about this compliment. And if their word of their love language, primary love language, is words of affirmation, this is really gonna ring home for them. It's gonna be a wonderful, wonderful gift. Well, the second love language is quality time. In the vernacular of quality time, nothing says "I love you" like full, undivided attention. I mean, being there for this type of a person is critical, but really being there. I mean, that means the TV off, fork and knife down, cell phone down, iPad down, computer down, all chores and tasks are on standby. When you do that, that makes your mate significant, and it makes them truly feel special and loved. It isn't enough just to even be in the same room with someone. I mean, a key ingredient is giving your spouse quality time of focused attention. When I sit with my wife and I give her 20 minutes of my undivided attention, and she does the same for me, we are giving each other 20 minutes of our life. And we'll never have those 20 minutes back again. We're giving a small piece of our lives to each other. And it's a powerful communicator of love. I mean, again, it isn't enough just to be in the same room with someone. You need to be giving them focused attention, especially in this era where there are just so many distractions. Cell phones, iPads, tablets. It's just so easy for people to be in their own little world. Let me give you an example. My wife and I have a good laugh from time to time over our violating this principle that we know and understand to be so important. We would have on our date nights, one of our rules for the Zustiak date night is it's supposed to be quality time together, because that is my one of my wife's primary top 2 love languages is quality time. And we'll go to a restaurant, and there have been times we have caught each other. She's on her iPhone and I've got my iPhone, and we're texting other people or we're doing Facebook updates, and we're not even saying a word to the person seated right across from us. And then one of us will look up and catch the other's attention and give them the stink eye and say, "Oops, we blew it." And we'll laugh and put away our phones, and then we'll have real conversation with real people. And you just need to keep reminding yourself of this, because it's easy to fall into that bad habit of just always being on your tablet. Just the other night, I came home from work and I had a book that I wanted to share with my wife because I purchased it for our grandson to help him think through what type of vocation he might want to do and what degree he'd like to get in college. And so I was really excited about it, and I was showing her all the different exercises and worksheets and the highlights of the book, and she was really interested in that. And then she set the book down. And so I thought, okay, we're done. And so I went to my iPad and I was reading this really interesting article. And then I looked up and there she was just staring at me. And she said, "Do you realize that I have been sitting here silent for 3 minutes?" I went, uh-oh. Busted. I had violated that important rule about focused attention. So you just have to keep reminding yourself and your spouse kind of over and over again, we need, all right, to be focused and paying attention to each other and not some electronic device. The activity that you end up involved in is really incidental. I mean, the important thing is that you're spending focused time with each other. I mean, the activity is just a vehicle that creates the sense of togetherness. The language of quality time has many dialects. One of the most common is that of quality conversation. Now, by quality conversation, I mean sympathetic dialogue, where two people are sharing their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings, their desires in a friendly, uninterrupted context. Now, most individuals who complain their spouse doesn't talk, they don't mean literally that he or she never says a word. What they mean is that they seldom take part in sympathetic dialogue. If your spouse's primary love language is quality time, that kind of dialogue is crucial to their emotional sense of being loved. Quality conversation is really quite different from the first love language. Words of affirmation, they focus on what we are saying, whereas quality conversation focuses in on what we are hearing, because we're listening to our mates tell us what's important to them, whether that's some event or it's an emotion that they're experiencing or a concern that they're thinking about. That quality time is we're really with them and we are hearing that. Let me give you 5 practical steps for effective listening. The first is to maintain eye contact when your spouse is talking. That keeps their mind from wandering, and it communicates that you are giving them your full attention. And if you're maintaining eye contact, then that means you're not looking at your cell phone or your iPad. Secondly, don't listen to your spouse and do something else at the same time. Okay, quality time is giving someone your undivided attention. You are focused on them, not on something else. You're not grading papers. You're not reading the paper. You're not watching a television program at the same time you're trying to listen to them. The third thing, this is really important, is listen for feelings. Ask yourself, what emotion is my spouse experiencing? And why is that emotion really important at this time and with what narrative that she's sharing with me? Fourth, you need to observe body language. Clenched fists, trembling hands, tears, furrowed brows, eye movement. Those things will all give you clues as to what the other is feeling. And refuse to interrupt. Recent research has indicated that the average individual listens for only, are you ready for this? 17 seconds before interrupting and interjecting their own ideas. Something that I would encourage you to try if you want to actually improve your skills at listening is is an exercise that I call the revolving discussion sequence. And what you'll do is you sit down with your spouse and you have someone keep time. And the rules are simply this. One person gets to talk. And they get to talk about anything they want to talk about for just 2 minutes. But during that 2 minutes, the other spouse has to just listen. You cannot interrupt. You cannot correct. You cannot ask a question. You cannot ask them to repeat anything. You just have to listen for 2 minutes. When the 2 minutes are over, then you have to say back everything that you heard them say without disagreeing with it, without correcting it, without adding anything to it, and without leaving anything out. And then the spouse will verify whether you heard them or if you changed anything or left anything out. And then you switch roles. Now it's your turn to talk, and you get to talk for 2 minutes. Now, you can either use your 2 minutes in response to what they talked about, or you can bring up something just totally different. Now, it's just 2 minutes, but for many people, that is the longest 2 minutes of their life because we aren't used to listening. And as the research says, 17 seconds is usually all that we'll listen before we interrupt. So let me encourage you to practice the revolving discussion sequence. Refuse to interrupt is our last one on that. You know, like we talked about, 17 seconds usually is all that people will do. Quality activities can include anything in which one or both of you has a genuine interest. The emphasis is not so much on what you're doing, but it's on why you are doing it. The purpose is to experience something together and then to walk away from that experience feeling like my wife cares about me. My husband cares about me. They were willing to do something with me that I enjoy, and they did it with a positive attitude. Now, that's really important. That's part of quality time also. You know, just because you went to the opera with your wife and if you sat there and griped the entire time doesn't mean that's quality time for her. In fact, that's going to be the opposite. So you just need to do something that they enjoy and do it with a positive attitude. People, that's love. And for some people, that's love's loudest voice. So the essential ingredients in a quality activity are at least one of you wants to do it. The other person has to be willing to do it. And both of you need to know why you're doing it. You're doing it to express love by being together. One of the byproducts of quality activity is that they provide a memory bank from which to draw upon in the years ahead. Quality time with your child doesn't require that you go somewhere special. I mean, hear me on this. You don't have to spend $1 gazillion buying tokens at Chuck E. Cheese in order to have quality time with your child. You can provide focused attention almost anywhere. And your most nurturing quality times will, frankly, just often be at home. Just when you're alone with your child and you're both just building something with Legos. or you're coloring in a coloring book, or you're stacking blocks. Unfortunately, finding time to be alone with each child may not be easy in our overscheduled, busy worlds. But hear me, it is essential. A very famous politician wrote these words in his diary. Spent the day fishing with my son, a day wasted. But they found the boy's diary later that he also kept. And here's what he wrote. Spent the whole day fishing with my dad. It was a perfect day. I feel sorry for that father who put work ahead of his relationship with his son. And he didn't realize, he was ignorant to the fact that what he saw as a waste, his son saw as a perfect day. A number of years ago, Dr. Robert Schuller from the Crystal Cathedral was on a whirlwind book promotion tour. He was visiting 8 cities in 4 days. It was an exhausting schedule in addition to all of the normal duties that Dr. Schuller had on his shoulders as, the senior minister at the Crystal Cathedral. So as he was going over his schedule with his administrative assistant on his return home, she reminded him that he was scheduled to have lunch with the winner of a charity raffle that the church had put on. Tickets had been raffled off for just a lunch with Dr. Schuller. And Schuller was suddenly sobered when he found out the winner of the raffle, because he knew the winner of the raffle before he even went to meet them for lunch, because he saw what they paid for the ticket, and happened to be $438.17. You know what that meant to him? The person who was willing to bid $438.17 was that person's entire savings. And it was his own teenage daughter. You see, while he's out busy doing good things for other people, Dr. Schuller had neglected his own daughter. She was screaming for quality time with her daddy. She was willing to empty her entire savings account just to have some focused attention with her dad. So how do you put this into practice? Right now, you could simply ask your spouse for a list of 5 activities that they would enjoy doing with you. And don't assume that you know what they'd want to do. No pressure. Let them list 5 activities and make plans to do one of them each month for the next 5 months. And if money is kind of an issue with some of the activities that they chose to do, space some freebies kind of in between the we can't afford these events. But man, make a decision, put it in your calendar that you're going to do that before the day's done. Simply ask them, what are 5 things that you would really enjoy doing together? And I'll do them with you, and I won't gripe, and I won't complain, and I will do this as an expression of my love for you. The third love language is that of receiving gifts. Now, do not mistake this love language for materialism. The receiver of gifts thrives on the love, the thoughtfulness, and the effort behind the gift. It isn't so much the gift itself. If you speak this language, the perfect gift or gesture, it shows that you're known, that you're cared for, that you are prized above whatever was sacrificed to bring that gift to you. A gift is something you can hold in your hand and you can say, look, my husband, my wife was thinking of me, or man, they remembered me. The gift is a symbol of that thought. Visual symbols of love are more important to some people than they are to others. That's why individuals have different attitudes towards wedding rings. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the gift costs a lot of money. What's important is that you thought of it or you thought of her. You know, I told you about my major fails here at the beginning of the webinar. I do have to tell you about one home run, all right? I'm not a total loser, all right? One of her favorite gifts that I gave her is one that I actually put a lot of thought into because I wanted to get her something that was really special, to communicate to her that she's special to me. And so I was racking my brain trying to come up with this gift that would do that. And I was listening to the radio while I was driving my car, and I heard this commercial, and I went, that's it. So I contacted these people, I paid the money, and I had a star named after my wife. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's a puny little star that's hard to find out there in the night sky. It was the thought behind the gift that made it meaningful. It was the uniqueness of it, the thought behind it. Gifts, they can be purchased, they can be found, they can even be made. I mean, gifts are these visual symbols of love. And visual symbols of love are much more important to some people than they are to others. You may have very little difficulty purchasing gifts for your spouse. But, you're going to experience emotional resistance to the idea of spending a lot of money, perhaps, if finances are tight. But understand, you don't have to spend lots of money. You could make something. Or you might save up, and it's a lot of money, and it might represent a pretty large sacrifice on your behalf. But if you purchase something that your mate really, really wanted, and they weren't even sure they would get, to see their face light up and what it means to them, knowing that you sacrificed, I want you to know it will be worth it. One of my favorite, most meaningful gifts from my wife and from my son took place when I was gone for a week speaking at a summer CIY conference. I came back and I found that my wife and my son had totally redecorated my office for me at home. They had painted the walls. My wife bought curtains to match. And my son took some of my favorite pictures from some of my old Ansel Adams calendars, and he cut them out and framed them and hung them in the room. And so every time I walk into my home office, it makes me smile because it says to me, I'm loved. So how are you going to put this into practice? Well, if your spouse's primary love language is the receiving of gifts, I mean, what beginning steps can you take to become a more proficient, a better gift giver? Well, if you really don't have a clue as to how to select a gift for your spouse, then enlist the services of a personal shopper. And what I mean by that is ask your wife's best friend or another family member, who really knows your spouse to help you. Share some ideas, all right, right now that you might have that would be just an excellent gift, something really meaningful that you could give to your spouse. That's how you put that into practice. So love language number 4 is acts of service. Some people's primary love language is acts of service. Now, by acts of service, I just simply mean you're doing things that you know that your spouse would like you to do. I mean, You seek to please them by serving them. You're expressing your love for them by doing these things for them. And I mean, it's just simple things like maybe cooking a meal, setting a table, washing the dishes, vacuuming, taking out the garbage, mowing the grass, changing the cat's litter box. I mean, these are all acts of service. And they require some thought, some planning, some time, some effort, some energy. But if they're done with a positive spirit, they are indeed expressions of love. I mean, the words that this spouse most desires to hear is simply, here, let me do that for you. And they don't have to be huge things. One of the things that my wife has told me that she just really appreciates is my wife has to use the CPAP machine while she sleeps because she has some sleep disorders. And one of the things that has to be done is the little water tank has to be filled each night. And I just have taken that upon myself to be the one who gets the distilled jug of water and measures it out and puts it in her tank and has that ready to go so that as soon as she gets into bed, she doesn't have to worry about that. She can just put her mask on and turn it on, and she's going to sleep well. It's just a little thing, doesn't take hardly any time at all, but it communicates in a big way. And it gets me bonus points. And gentlemen, you can never have enough bonus points, believe me. So do something that would be a wonderful act of service. If you have a spouse with acts of service as their primary love language, find the specific things that they'd like help with, but just asking. Just ask them what they would like the most help with. Acts of service, however, are only effective if you're doing the most important and meaningful things for your mate. I mean, it's easy to work with the wrong things. You know, a husband could spend an entire weekend doing chores, raking leaves, winterizing the cars, cutting logs for the fireplace, rolling up the water hoses, and it could not add one single drop into his wife's love tank. On the other hand, that same husband could bring home Chinese takeout, clean the kitchen afterwards, put the kids to bed while his wife gets to relax after being wiped out from a really long day. That would fill her tank to overflowing. I think Jesus provided us with a great and simple illustration of how we express love by acts of service when he washed the feet of his disciples. I mean, a culture where people wore sandals and they walked on dirt streets, it was customary for the lowest servant in the house to wash the feet of the guests as they arrived. So when we translate this into marriage, it means we're going to do acts of service to express love to our spouse, even when they require humility and sacrifice. So how are you going to put this into practice? Well, if your spouse's love language is acts of service, which ones would you consider, doing? Ask your spouse to make a list, 10 things that they would like for you to do during the next month. And then have them prioritize them by number 1 to 10, with 1 being the most important and 10 the least. Use this list to plan your strategy for a month of love. So think about that and do it right now. Our last love language is that of physical touch. Now, let me clarify something. This language isn't all about the bedroom. A person whose primary language is physical touch is not surprisingly very touchy. Hugs, pats on the back, holding hands, thoughtful touches on the arm, the shoulder, or the face. Those can all be ways to show excitement, concern, care, and love. Physical presence and accessibility are crucial, while neglect or abuse can come across as unforgivable and even destructive. Physical touch can make or break a relationship. I mean, it can communicate hate or it can communicate love. And we have long known that physical touch is a way of communicating love. Numerous research projects in the area of child development have reached this conclusion. Babies who are held, hugged, and kissed developed a healthier emotional life than those that are left alone and untouched and unheld for long periods of time. When they don't receive that physical contact, they will not thrive. In order to thrive, newborns must feel touch, and they must be given touch as much as they're given food. I mean, studies have been done in orphanages and hospitals that repeatedly tell us that infants who are deprived of skin contact will actually lose weight, become ill, and even die. We know that premature babies given periods of touch therapy will gain weight faster, they cry less, and they show more signs of a relaxed pulse, relaxed respiration rate, and muscle tension. I mean, physical touch is also a powerful vehicle for communicating marital love. Holding hands, kissing, embracing, sexual intimacy, those are all ways of communicating emotional love to one's spouse. For some individuals, physical touch is their primary love language. Without it, they feel unloved. With it, their emotional tank is filled and they feel secure in the love of their spouse. Since touch receptors are located throughout the body, lovingly touching your spouse almost anywhere can be an expression of love. Now, that does not mean all touches are created equal. Some will bring more pleasure to your spouse than others. And your best instructor is going to be simply your spouse, of course. They know best. They're the ones that you're seeking to love. So your spouse knows best what they perceive as a loving touch. Now, do not insist on touching her in a way and in your time. Learn to speak her love dialect. Your spouse may find some touches uncomfortable or even irritating. So learn which type of touch is going to be enjoyable and received in the right manner that actually communicates love. I mean, think about this. Almost instinctively, in times of crisis, what do? We hug one another. Why? Because physical touch is a powerful communicator of love. In a time of crisis, more than anything, we need to feel loved. Now, we cannot always change events, but we can survive events if we feel loved. There was an essay written by an 11-year-old boy, and here's what he wrote. He said, "My mother keeps a cookie jar in the kitchen, and we can help ourselves to it almost any time, except if it's too close to mealtime. Only my dad can help himself anytime. When he comes home from the office, he helps himself to a cookie, no matter if it's just before we eat. He always slaps my mother on the behind, and he brags about how great she is and how good she can cook. And then she turns around and they hug. The way they do it, you'd think they just got married or something. Makes me feel good. And that is what I like best about my home." Wow. Men, Best thing you can do for your children is to love their mother well. And sometimes that means physical touch. I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle John from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. John simply writes this: "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us, and he sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us." Maybe the best way that we can fulfill this scripture, this command, this admonition to love other people, is by learning their love language and then putting it into practice. So just discuss the power of touch as a love language with your spouse. And if this is your spouse's love language, what are some considerations in learning your spouse's love dialect with this language? What is your primary love language? Well, what makes you feel most loved by your spouse? What do you desire almost above anything else? And so if the answer to those questions really doesn't come to your mind immediately, then what you might think about doing is to look at the negative use of love languages. So you may ask, what does your spouse do or fail to do that hurts you most deeply? Because the opposite of what hurts you most is probably that person's love language. What have you most often requested of your spouse? Because the thing you've most often requested, the things you've most often asked for, is likely the thing that would make you feel the most loved. That would be your primary love language. In what way do you regularly express love to your spouse? Your method of expressing love may be an indication that you would also like to have that same thing expressed back to you. That would make you feel loved. Now, if you want a nice little overview of all that I have shared with you, this last slide should help you understand how to apply this new knowledge and understanding to your mate. It also gives you a hint on some things to avoid. So it's very simple. If words of affirmation are a person's main love language, then you just need to learn how to encourage and affirm, how to communicate appreciation, how to empathize, how to listen actively. So the actions you would take are, maybe send an unexpected note, a text, or a card. Encourage genuinely and often. The things you don't want to do is non-constructive criticism or not recognizing or appreciating effort that they have done. Physical touch, it's nonverbal. You just touch them. Hug, kiss, hold hands, show physical affection regularly. Make intimacy a thoughtful priority. Things you don't want to do is physical neglect or long periods of time without intimacy, or even receiving affection coldly. Receiving of gifts, it's the thoughtfulness, making your spouse a priority. So give thoughtful gifts. Small things matter in a big way. Express gratitude when receiving a gift. And something you want to avoid is forgetting special occasions, Valentine's Day, anniversaries, birthdays, or being enthusiastic in your gift giving. Quality time is the love language. You just communicate that by uninterrupted, focused conversations. One-on-one time's critical. Create special moments together. Take walks. Do small things with your spouse. Weekend getaways are huge. What you don't want to do is to allow distractions when spending time together or long stints without one-on-one time. And if acts of service is the primary love language, phrases like, I'll help, they want to know you're with them, partnered with them. Do chores together, make them breakfast in bed, go out of your way to help just alleviate their just daily regular workload. And you want to avoid making requests of others a higher priority, lacking follow through on any tasks, whether they are big or small. So you should find a PDF attachment that's part of this webinar that will help you to discover your love language. Now, if you prefer, you can take it online. Just Google the 5 love languages test, and there'll be a number of options for you. It's a very simple test. There's just 30 questions. It's self-scoring, and your primary love language is simply your highest score. Now, if you have 2 love languages that scored equally, then congratulations. That means you're bilingual in love language. Or even if you have a highest one, there's another one very close. That means both expressions of love are important to you. My wife is like that. Words of affirmation and quality time. Both of those are very, very close. Now, the fact that your primary love language is much higher than others doesn't mean that you should dismiss all the other languages as insignificant. Your spouse may express love in those ways, and it's helpful for you to understand all of them and to know how to do them. Now, let me just say this at the last, all right? This isn't a game with a scorecard. The benefit of learning each other's primary love language is you develop a better sense of connection and an increased understanding. So I hope this has been helpful and informative for you. And I pray that as you put this knowledge into practice, your ability to love your spouse will only increase, and you'll have the best Valentine's Day ever next week. So we appreciate your tuning in to this webinar and your support of Ozark Christian College. And may you have a great day, and God bless.